GoFloaters. And today I have another special guest, Mine, joining us. Mine is a founder of Happy Work Studio, and she's been working with a lot of remote companies, helping them put their remote first culture in place, helping them transition from an office centric organization to a remote first organization. So there's a lot packed into today's webinar because you've got somebody who's been there, done that, has is an authority in building happy remote teams. So I'm looking forward to this, Vinay, and we've connected before. I can clearly see that there's going to be a lot of learning experience for me and everybody who's chiming into this webinar. So thank you, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the introduction, for your kind words. I'm super thrilled to be here.
Awesome, thank you. So again, before I jump into a set of questions that I had in mind, I would love you to take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself in terms of your background, how you got into helping and working with remote teams, right? And a little bit of story behind Happy Work Studio.
Okay, so everything started back in 2012. I was the country representative for Upwork, and what I was doing was I was being a pioneer in Turkey to talk about gig economy, how to work as a freelancer, how to bid as a freelancer. So started doing events and also creating awareness about the future
Right,
of work. Did a couple
right,
of conferences about the future of work. And so that's how everything started and evolved in time. I was also a country manager for two different startups, fully distributed teams. So I was creating that idea and just in both in country and globally, and talking about remote work, being a keynote speaker. But back then it was not the reality for most of the companies.
right.
So they were actually inviting me to give motivational speeches to their employees for the future of work, for innovative thinking. But when the pandemic happened, it became reality for
Right,
almost
right,
everyone. So even the ones who were just resisting to the idea had to embrace the idea in order to not stay behind the competition. So they realized that
right.
this is the way to go. So that's when they started reaching out to me, asking for consultancy about
Mhm.
how to transition to remote work and how to do things right. And that's when I started Happy Work Studio, because before then I was running my brand Startist, which I still go on running it. But
Mhm.
then I decided to set up another brand and to revolve around the idea of well-being, to just be a happy culture, happy company, so that people are just waking up every day feeling that they are part of a higher purpose, and that they are feeling happy about the thing that they are doing, as they call work. Because usually people, I figured out that people would resonate with something negative, so it had
Mhm.
negative connotations.
Right.
And I wanted to change it into something that they enjoy doing, which is the case with myself. And we were just like having a meeting today, and I was just like saying, I'm so grateful every day that I wake up to a day that I get to do things that I'm super happy about.
Right, right. No, awesome. I think the last time we connected, you had joined from Istanbul in Turkey, and today you are in Saudi Arabia. So that's the other perk of remote work, right? And so you are practicing what you preach, and that's a great example of somebody who truly believes in what they say, right? It's not just I mean, you truly believe in the essence of remote work and the flexibility it gives, and the fact that you can do amazing stuff uh, beyond the four walls of an office, and that kind of comes across clearly in terms of what you say, right? So now, Vinay, so and again, very coincidentally, GoFloaters journey also started with freelancing, right? So Srivatsan, my co-founder, he was working with TopTal, right? I mean, Upwork
Oh,
and
okay,
TopTal
yeah,
kind
we
of
talked
do
about it.
kind of very similar things, but different audiences, right? So, and again, I was interacting with a lot of freelancers in my early part of my entrepreneurial journey. So we also started to serve freelancers, and as the pandemic hit, the canvas size grew larger. Right, it was no longer freelancers that were remote working or needed flexible flexibility in terms of workplace and work time and who they work with, but even it became a norm, like you said, right? It was no longer fringe element in the society. So it's kind of very similar,
Mhm.
I think, in terms of how our trajectories have led to helping remote teams across the world, right? So now jumping into the topic of discussion, right? And I think we're going to keep it to a lot of topics, a lot of things that are usually not spoken about, right? When remote work is spoken about. And the first thing that I want to take it with you is that the moment any dialogue, right? Pick up any dialogue on Twitter or pick up any dialogue on LinkedIn, or even most of the conversations that I have with leaders of companies, right? 90% of the time is spent on workplace, the physicality of work and where it happens, right? What is the environment within which the work is being done, right? So there's a lot of that is around that, and some bit of time goes to uh, team collaboration and things like that. But most of the dialogue is around the physicality of the workplace, right? And I think both of us agree that the yes, it's important, but there are so many hundreds of other things that need the limelight as much as the physicality of the workplace being right. So I want to kind of open up with this question, right? What are the other high priority items that get missed out in the conversation on remote work, right? I mean, we'll keep workplace
Mhm.
aside, right? So apart from workplace,
Okay. So as you mentioned, now the conversation, the discussion, what we see on the news is always revolving around the location. But as we see, this is not only about the location because work is changing. How we do work is changing. And this is so natural because why? The way we live our lives has been changing a lot over the last decade. So, and work is part of our life. So, while everything is changing, we are looking for agility, approximately about everything. And we want to keep the work the way it was 100
right?
years ago. So, I mean, it has to adapt to this new way of living. And
Right.
the challenges that the companies are facing, apart from the location change, and this is number one, I think, is the communication.
Mm-hmm.
So because what I keep hearing from people is that they are being challenged with not being in the same space and not being able to just like pat on their shoulders and just like ask a quick question. And it takes time, it takes some intentionality to
Right.
change that behavior because it's a behavior change and behaviors
Mm-hmm.
don't change overnight. So
Right.
that's why it takes intentionality, it takes time, and there needs to be a remote handbook, a guidebook to let people know what's okay for that company and what's not okay. So
Right.
in communication wise, it's really important to define all the communication tools. Like in what
Mm-hmm.
case shall I be just, reaching out to you on the phone or on Slack? Because some people are just like, complaining that they feel like they have to be available 7/24 and
Mm-hmm.
that they don't want to be disturbed by messages coming late at night. And what I tell
Right.
them is, you are the one who should be controlling, not the sender.
Right. Right.
You are
Very
an
true.
adult and you should be taking that responsibility. So that's actually why we are just like being challenged at the moment, because we were so used to having something to be told to us, to be controlled. Everything is just like in a controlled environment. Now
Right.
with all that flexibility, people don't know how to do it. That's the
Right.
challenge.
Yep. Yeah.
And
Absolutely. Right. Please.
communication is in the heart of it. It's really in the heart of it. And so like async communication, when do we get together, in what cases, and when do we have that async communication, what tools do we need to use? I
Right.
mean, for collaboration, for communication, instant messaging, and like collaboration tools are extremely important because it's really important for those people to spend async time so that when they come together for a synchronous meeting, that they only talk about the results on decision making, not the work. Most people meetings, most companies and people meetings is a biggest pain point. Why? Because if you look at their calendars, and I'm just like having so much fun about this, when I look at, as as your rank goes up, your availability drops down because
Right.
your calendar is just like totally full. And I'm asking them, if you have back-to-back meetings, how can you find time to take the actions that were discussed during the meeting? That's
Right,
why
right,
people are going burnout. It's not because of remote work. It's because they are not doing it right.
right.
So this is
Absolutely.
really important.
Right, absolutely. So communication for sure, right? So that you spoke about, and I think in a larger picture, like you said, right, drawing the boundaries of how certain things will be done, right? The processes of what would be async, what would be sync, right? Expectations, setting the expectations right as to what are the overlap times where collaboration can happen, sync, what are the times that should not happen. So those boundaries need to be kept. In fact, one of the mentors that I was talking to, right, and they kind of put it a different way, right? A lot of managers, they don't know exactly the outcome that they want from the work they're assigning to somebody, right? So they're constantly, like you said, tapping on the
Mhm.
shoulders. What are you doing? Okay, you're doing this. Maybe you should do it this way, right? So they're constantly tweaking the journey or tweaking the direction in which work is being done, is because they themselves don't have the clarity of what they're expecting at the end of the task being completed. So they're constantly monitoring and constantly tweaking. So definitely better documentation, better expectation management, and better definition of what outcome is expected, right? Better planning. So I think remote work, what I've seen is, like, if you don't plan work properly, right? If you don't say, hey, this is when I need you to deliver this because this person is dependent on your outcome and so on and so forth, right? If you don't do that planning well, then you're going to have a lot of those challenges like you spoke about. Now coming to the part where Vinay, you probably do a lot of work here, right? And see, companies that are born remote, there's no baggage, right? They kind of companies that have startups that have been founded post the pandemic, they've had it relatively easier because they have built their they've from first principles they are remote, right? So they built it that way, and they didn't have any baggage of the mindset of the uh, office era or the bad processes of the office era, right? So what are the big gaping holes or big challenges that you observe in companies that are transitioning from an in-office work model to a remote first work model, right? What do they typically end up missing out, right? What causes the maximum heartburn for employees? And again, maybe this question we can keep it to employees, because uh, the topic is around happy employees. So what do they miss out in kind of creating a enjoyable work culture and enjoyable work environment when they transition from in office to a remote
Mhm.
first setup?
So the I think the one thing that would be on top of my list is the mindset. Because if mindset doesn't change, nothing will change.
Right,
And that has to start with here. So we are talking about flexibility. Flexibility is what defines remote work. Flexibility is the access of what the future of work is. And if you don't change that mindset, if you just
right,
like act as if, then it's not going to happen. So, and that starts with leadership. Leadership team, they have to walk the talk. And this is what we see in companies when it's not working, is because the leadership team is not walking the talk. So they just like say, okay, let's have less meetings or let's have no meetings day. But then they just like, send out invitations, meeting invitations. So when the employees see that the manager is doing that, they feel intimidated about taking the action to just like of whatever was discussed.
right,
So it's really important that we are having a buy-in of the leadership team. We are having a handshake with the leadership team and making sure that they are living in that mindset.
right,
And that's really, I mean, that in my experience, that has been the fundamental thing that was missing in those companies who were being challenged with the transition to remote work. So that's one, the mindset. And the second one is infrastructure. For some
hmm,
companies, they don't have the proper infrastructure, or they have the infrastructure but they don't know how to put it in good use.
right, right,
So sometimes when there was one big company that I was doing a project with, and they were asking me about the tools, and I said, okay, let's do an assessment. Like, let's have your portfolio of tools before we buy another one, because usually one of the biggest mistakes that companies are making is they are thinking if they buy a tool, it's just like a magic stick and everything is going to be a
right,
whole
right,
different way. No, that doesn't happen like that. First, you need to understand what's missing in the company. What is your pain point? What is it that you cannot meet? And so that identifying those unmet needs. So, and then going for and looking for the tools.
Right.
And usually when they take the tools, they just like think, this is not working, and they start complaining. Okay, we spent this much money and it's not working because the behavior is not changing. Because you're not just like changing the behavior so that the tool is also helping you.
Yeah,
That's so
absolutely.
infrastructure, the mindset, and the resources, human resources. So I mean, all the processes has to be in sync, starting from how you, even the content of your job posts, even how you're just like communicating both internally and externally, how you are making the interview. So, and that is defined by the values. So you need to
Right.
have your values redefined based on this new way of working, so that everyone knows what to do based on the values. You don't need to
Right.
tell people what to do, what not to do. If you have a concrete value system, and everyone's aligned around those values and the behavior, the emotions that is going to support that culture in the company.
Absolutely. I think these are all big points, and um, these are all. I mean, let's be very apparent. I mean, let's be very transparent that none of this is easy, right? Mindset change, like you said,
Exactly.
it's like with that, and again, I think you rightly said that if that doesn't happen, everything else is not going to fall in place, right? None of the rest. You could put in the best remote work policy or a handbook. You can put everything in place, right? But it's all going to be misaligned with what happens on a day-to-day basis, right? So I want to kind of take a couple of more minutes on this mindset problem that you spoke about, right? And I'm very sure you get to work with these companies, and probably this is the biggest uh, aspect that you try and fix in these companies with managers and leaders. So how do you just curious to know, right? How do you when a company approaches you and you see that the fundamental problem they have is the mindset problem, right? How do you go about changing this? How do you go about transforming it or put them in the path of changing this mindset, right? Because it's not an instantaneous thing. It's again going to happen over a course of time, right? But how do you put in the right mechanisms in place so that this mindset constantly changes? And like you said, it has to come top down, right? Everybody looks up to what their boss is doing. If they violate these these cardinal rules, they are also going to think that they have the freedom to also violate these cardinal rules, right? So how do you make it trickle down, top down? How do you? I mean, maybe you can take an example of a company that you recently helped and walk us through
Mhm.
what the process looks like.
Okay, so what we do is, if the company, it depends on the scale of the company. So if we
Right.
are talking about a large scale company, then we create groups, change maker groups, with a total representation of different departments, ages, tenure, and we design this model, this new way of working handbook together, so that everyone is just like being involved in the process, so that this is not an HR project, but this is a company
Right.
project.
You get the buy-in
And this
from
is
them.
exactly. So this is how we are positioning it. And
Right.
usually how I motivate the teams is saying that, now you are just like writing the next 100 years of this company, because this
Mm.
is a fundamental change for the history of the company. So
Right.
we take the buy-in of the employees, and since they are just like, with perfect representation of different departments, when they go back to their departments, they make sure that they are the ambassadors, the change makers of this program, so that they are just like motivating their team members to
Hmm.
adapt to this new way of working. So
Right.
having that buy-in, having that support from the team members is really key. So that's one thing. And
Yeah.
two, as I said, we are creating the mission statement, purpose statement of this new way of working. So when I start with the teams, we just like create a purpose statement about this new way of working. And then we talk about, so what kind of behavior, what kind of values, what kind of emotions, mindset would support this purpose, and what would not support, hurt this purpose. And
Hmm.
so we specifically all write those and create infographics, so that people can just like see. And I usually like to combine it with a software, with a tool. So because like learning is happens through reinforcement. You have to
Right.
reinforce the same thing, so that it becomes a behavior, so that people don't forget about it. So it's not like a memorized thing, but it's like an automatic thing, so that
Automatic
people are
thing,
just like
yes.
naturally like behaving like that. So it's
Right.
really important to define those, so that whenever they see something off, they just like think about that. This was like, this is supposed to hurt our purpose, so I
Right.
should be doing this, so that you don't, keep on reminding people. So
Right.
this is really important, this is really key. And like getting the buy-in, getting their involvement, and just like, defining everything at the mindset, behavior and emotional level.
Right.
So, and after that, it's also important to pick the right tools, so that people, let's say we have the value of recognition. So there's one good example that I can give you. I'm an advisor at Vertazon. It's a cloud consultancy company, US based company, and it's fully distributed. So we have team members all over the world.
Right.
And so recognition is something that we were missing. And
Mm.
so what the HR team did is, now there's a Slack-based, Slack integrated app called Matter, and we are doing feedback Fridays. So on each Friday, everyone's giving each other feedback and recognition, and then they earn points, and they can redeem those points. So
Right.
there's, the most feedback giver, most feedback taker of the week, so that there's even a further recognition, and people then start even recognizing for things that are really, we would think would small, but they're not small. I mean, we don't need like big huge things to recognize people. That's what
Right.
we are just like, we are overcomplicating things. So things are so simple. People
Right.
just like want to be seen, they want to be cared for. That's it. They want to be just like, feel, because this is what stays. I mean, you forget about incidents, you forget about situations. The only thing that stays with you is the feeling, how you
Right.
feel about the memory. So the memory is just like coming with the feeling. So as a company, this is what we should do. We should make sure that they have this feeling, the positive feeling about the culture, about the company. So just to design everything around that.
Right. Well said, Minnie. I think in a remote first setting, this recognition that you spoke about, or acknowledgement that you talked about, right, is a lot more. It has to be more intentional, right? It has to be because, like you said, right, when you don't, you're not seeing, you're not in a team setting, you're in an office setting. Uh, this connectedness, this belonging of a larger team, alignment to the larger purpose of the company, larger vision of the company, uh, it kind of has to be reinforced, right? Every now and
Yeah.
then, right? Because it's easy to fall apart. You're just doing your own work. You're just doing it in a silo, and then you don't gel well, right? Because that's one thing that we've heard from team members, that uh, uh, like they don't feel that they're part of a larger team, right? They just, okay, I've been asked to do this, I'm doing that, but I'm not connected to the vision, I'm not connected to my team, right, in the true sense. I think these things would kind of create that connectedness, right? Whether those points really value, I mean, with the redemption of, it's not that, right? It's part that you are being seen, right? You're this
Mm-hmm.
you're constantly being seen, and your presence is felt, and your presence and your contribution is important to whatever you do is important to the team and the vision of the company. That's kind of, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
that's the feeling that people want to have, and they miss out sometimes when you
Yeah.
transition from in office to remote.
And I want to add one more thing about that connectedness, to have regular check-ins and check-outs, so
Right.
that everyone is aligned. So because I sometimes I hear teams not knowing what the other team member is doing, or like, what blockages that they have. So, at the beginning, I mean, at least two, like, have one at the beginning of the week, the check-in, and the checkout at the end of the week. I mean, it's always nice to have, midweek check-ins to see how everything is going. And
Hmm.
I am just like, a strong believer of weekly goals. So that, it's agile. You're just like running those sprints, and that everyone's aligned around the goals. Everyone knows what to do. And if they have a blocker, and if they need a support from the team, then the team can support them, and they know ahead of time, so that things just don't happen at the last minute, that
Right,
there
right,
are no
right.
enough resources. So it's really important that those check-in and check-out meetings happen. Sometimes it does not need to be sync. It can be
Mm-hmm,
async. Like what we
mm-hmm,
do is we use Loom. Like we
mm-hmm.
record. You can just like even comment on the video, and
Right.
we sometimes do that check in check out. We send each other, however we are just like planning it to be. We're just like recording a video, sending it to the team, and if anyone has comments, they just like comment on it. But that creates a the connectedness, the feeling of connectedness, so that you feel like you are in sync with the rest of the team.
Right, makes sense. Completely makes sense. Mini. I think the check-in, check-outs is another important tip, or how to say, right, strategy that companies should. So we've started to do that, right? We realize that uh, when we don't do that, right, when we don't keep checkpoints in between and kind of see how things are going, specifically when newer team members are joining, what kind of roadblocks they face, right? So it becomes too late for you to when you don't have those, sometimes it's too close to the deadline that you realize that they probably didn't get something, the input to them was not provided correctly, then it's no point trying. You can't fix the problem, right? You're already behind schedule. So I think that's important, and doing it as sync is a great idea. We do it sync because most of the team members are in the same time zone, but I think
Mhm.
sometimes it would make sense to do it async. Larger teams would certainly make sense. Now, staying on the topic of how Happy Work Studio helps uh, other companies, right? So you spoke when we connected offline. You spoke about the kind of workshops that you do for leadership, for the middle management employees. You spoke about workshops for awareness creation, workshops for well-being, uh, right? That you spoke about, right? So could you kind of spill a little bit on, uh, let's say, maybe let's take middle management, right? Managers, right? Uh,
Mhm.
what kind of interventional workshops or what kind of awareness workshops do you conduct to kind of um, um, make them successful remote managers, right? So because I think probably the managers have gotten the wrong, I don't say wrong, but I think it's probably uh, their own fault as well. They in a lot of companies, right, leaders are fully aligned, employees are fully aligned, the middle management is the friction point, right? Both of them are trying to make this work, and it
Exactly.
so it's they always, a lot of cases they become the roadblock, or they become the impediment to embracing the culture faster and remote being remote first, right? So what kind of workshops would you do you typically do to middle management of these companies that are
Mhm.
transitioning?
And you explain in a perfect way, because I feel so sorry about those middle managers, because they get the pressure from the director level or just higher
Right.
level, and they are trying not to cascade it down to their juniors, but they also have requests, complaints, things happening, and they just like feel like there's the cheese between the bread, and they just like keep being pushed and pushed. And so it's really important to first acknowledge that.
Hmm.
So acknowledge the hardship so it's really hard, and they have so many things. I mean, let alone that stress. They have their duties, their responsibilities that they have to do daily. So we need to acknowledge that this is something hard. So it's even that acknowledging that will help them psychologically,
Right.
because at the moment not acknowledging that, and just like they start complaining because they don't see that it is being acknowledged. And so to take into the awareness of other people, they start complaining because this is how they think that it's going to be visible.
Hmm.
So first, what we teach them is just like expressing themselves, self expression, expressing themselves, right, and creating that awareness. And I mean, our workshops also are concentrated on some meditation techniques, on self awareness, body awareness. We have like a perfect meditation called body scanning meditation, so that we are using our five senses to overcome that stress. So when they are just like stressful, how to use our five senses, and how to just like concentrate on those, and breathing techniques. So more about like self discovery. We always start with self values, identifying their self values, self strengths, so that they are well aware of those as well, and we use them as their power, so through the change. When we are doing projects, I love to start with it, asking people what their superpower is, so that they feel empowered to make that change. So whatever we do, all of our workshops are around focusing on that self-awareness, self-strength, and the inner strength that
Right.
people have, and using that inner strength to create that change.
Great. I think that was to me. It sounded uh, very counterintuitive, right? That you kind of have to focus on. I mean, you've spent so much of energy and focus on the self-awareness to make them to recognize the fact that they are the sandwich layer, right? The fact that yes, we acknowledge that you are getting this right, because I mean they have to affect this change management at the same time they have to produce results, right? The KPIs of the
Yeah.
company cannot change, right? And you can't expect much, right? So because their tried and tested formula is a command control technique to micromanage, right? To get productive work done, right? But then you say that no, employees need to have flexibility, employee engagement is important, employee well-being is important, right? You give a lot of soft targets to them and you have hard targets to them, and they've got to do both, right? And it's kind of difficult to expect any human being to manage it with composure, with calm, right? With
Yeah.
not having a burnout. So I think all these techniques that you spoke about, I think I'm sure is helping these managers out to tide over this, and I mean use their positivity, inner positivity, to be able to overcome these challenges, right? So rather than going in a
Mhm.
complaint mode, like you said, right? Um, no,
And one important
yeah,
thing, I think what you mentioned is really important, because they keep doing new things. Okay, let's do now the well-being workshop. Let's do this workshop. And that becomes a burden for them too.
right,
Each new thing, I mean, the company is doing it as a favor, but it becomes a burden on them.
absolutely,
Because what's happening is they are not looking at the workload. I was visiting a company, they have this, the a perfect socializing area, and they have like video games. They created a perfect place for people to just like enjoy themselves, just relax. There was no one in that area, and I asked them, is it like this the whole day? And she said, yeah, it's like, and I said, why? So people are really busy. Then I said, I mean, maybe instead of like investing this money and time and effort into this, you would it would have been much better if you hired a couple of more people, so the workload on those people is
right,
less, so that they can take the time to spend
absolutely.
time with however they like to do.
Absolutely. So in my previous organization, there was a running joke in the company, right? So there was a period of time where so every change management would be called Operation something, Operation Blue, Operation Orange, or Operation Efficiency, whatever, right? So the running joke was so many operations are happening on these managers. Nobody is caring whether they're in ICU or they're already dead. Right? So you're just doing something or other, and finally the managers have to implement that, right? They have to bring the change over, right? And before one is done, you're already on the next, right? The target is already constantly moving, right? And you can't expect much. So, anyways, I think that's the that's the reality in many organizations. But yeah, I think these techniques should, like you said, right? Like what is practical, what is pragmatic than doing the fancier things, right? So makes a more prudent sense. And we spoke about lot about uh, companies, lot about the change management, lot about the mindset and all that, right? I want to step down to um, um, again fundamental things, right? So in terms of like uh, what what not everybody can be successful at remote work, right? And in fact, some of the fires, some of the mishiring that we've done uh, at GoFloaters are people who couldn't, who are amazing people who are like probably the best of their pool if it was all office, right? If his work was being happen, work would happen in the office, right? But they couldn't, they failed miserably to adjust to a remote first way of working, right? So we spoke about a lot about what should leadership do, what should management do, right? Like the the top of the pyramid should do, right? But what should employees do, right? What kind of skills and competencies they should kind of acknowledge that are important for being a successful and a happy remote employee, right? And what should
Mm.
uh, because it's not all take, right? They have to give also. They have to be part of this puzzle as well. Right? They have to, like you said, right? They need to buy in into the policies, into the processes, into the communication mechanisms that are being drawn out, right? So, what do you think? What competencies and skills make a successful remote employee?
So the first one is flexibility, to be agile, to be flexible, because this is about being boundless. So I mean, if we're talking about something borderless, and it should be about the mindset too. So you should be just like, borderless, thinking
Right,
borderless, working borderless. So that's one thing, flexibility. And second one is self-responsibility, having that accountability. And as I was mentioning, you don't get to just like, expect someone to tell you what to do or when to
right,
do.
right,
Taking that self responsibility and acting towards that. I mean, so whatever your goal is, whatever your deliverables are, you shouldn't be expecting to be told what to do, when to do, and just like, be self-aware that this is your responsibility and you have the to-dos and to just take that responsibility. So that's really important too, having that self-account, the self-responsibility. And this is like, as I said, being an adult. So about this, all the challenges that people are now having is kind of, I call it the adolescent pain, to when, people are just moving from being a teenager to being an adult. They're going through that challenging times and having that thing. This is exactly what we are experiencing at work right now, because they were so much used to being ruled and just like controlled by other people, that they taking that self responsibility is hard right now.
right,
And so
right,
they have to take action on themselves. So that's also really important. And adaptability is just because, like, they have to be adaptable to new cultures, to the new way of working. And because if they're a fully distributed company, then they are going to work with people from all around the world, with different cultures, with different habits. So, and they also would be working across time zones, so adapting themselves to being, available or not available, to say no to things, and which would be okay by everyone. So that's why it's
right.
really important to have that psychological safety in the company as well. So to be just like, adaptable to all those situations is really key for the employees.
And your top two or three tips on how each of them could develop these competencies. How would they go about, for example, see the ownership aspects that you spoke about, right? How would you the self responsibility that you spoke about?
Mhm.
How would you develop this, right? Because first of all, like you said, you have to acknowledge the fact that you're not taking that responsibility, right? So once you've realized that, how would a company or an organization uh, see, first is to do it very, very methodically, a process put in place, right? But then over a period of time, it has to become part of the culture of the company, right? Because it becomes a self-oiled, uh, perpetuated motion, right? So, but before that happens, right? Before culture takes over and ensures that everybody is self-responsible, what kind of interventional ways in which the company or people from Happy Work Studio could make that competency a part of ingrained in part of these employees.
First of all, this is not for everyone. So, I mean, some people just they don't have that competency. Yes, it can be learned, but some people don't prefer that. So, and that's okay, because like if that's not okay with you, if you cannot just like go with that
Right.
culture, then that's why the company needs to be really clear about their communicate clearly about their culture, so that if that's not a fit, that person
Mhm.
should not be hired in the first place. So that's one thing. And now I'm also like working with companies that assess the tendency, right, or like the
Mm.
how good they are with remote work capability, the skills. So there are companies now assessing that. So that's really important. But how we do is, um, just like creating those and recognizing people when they take that self responsibility, just like giving them that accountability, giving them the space, and just like maintaining the psychological safety so that they know that if they say no to something, let's say
Mhm.
a meeting that happens at night their time, that they can watch it from the recording.
Right.
So this is really important. And also, as I said at the beginning, to define the rules, to have a guideline,
Mhm.
a remote handbook, so that the employee is comfortable about staying within those frames and just like developing their own way of working, given that there is that framework and the company rules around the way that they work.
Right. Great. I think like you said, right? Giving the one thing that you've mentioned two, three times is the psychological freedom to express yourself, right? So that I think that uh, because otherwise the feedback loop is always going to be incomplete, and that kind of stops the process of evolving this remote work, remote first culture, right? So if you set it in motion, it has to evolve over time, right? And I think the companies that allow for this feedback loop, the psychological freedom to express, are the ones that have been able to constantly engage their employees to tweak their approach to remote for being remote first. I think that's kind of coming across as one of the fundamental building blocks of a culture of a company that wants to be remote first, right? And on that point, the last question, Mine, I know we've stepped over time, which we always do. Whenever the talk is very engaging and whenever the discussions are enlightening, we always end up stretching over time. This will be my last question. So you spoke about a lot of fundamentals, right? A lot of pieces that need to fall in place to set the process in motion for a company to transition from being office centric to, or for the matter, like being remote first. Right? A lot of fundamentals that need to be in place, right? Spoke about the workshops that you do, the enablement that Happy Work Studio does. Right? A lot of you talked about the handbook. You spoke about redefining the values of the company in a remote first settings. You spoke about so many fundamentals, right? But how does a company convert all these fundamental building blocks into the culture, into a remote first culture, right? Because if that transition does not happen, you constantly are uh, up against headwind, right? You're constantly trying to fix problems as they keep coming, right? Unless it becomes imbibed in the culture of the
Mhm.
company, right? Where and you can't. That's the only way to scale, right? Because in a remote first company, by definition, you're hiring. Uh, I mean, if you want to take advantage of, you're hiring from different cultures, hiring from different parts of the world, different geographies, and all that, right? Unless it becomes a part of the culture, that scaling is going to be very, very uphill journey. So, how do you convert these into the culture?
So it's really important to do self check and also pulse checks with and listening to the employee. So what's working, what's not working. So to identify those points what's that are not working. So and to revisit them and to align them with the whole company. So it's really important, as I said at the beginning, it's really important that this change happens with the involvement of all the employees or just like the representative group. So that you start with the involvement, and also with that group of people, whoever that those change makers are, to just like have a review of the process to see what's working, not working, and take action, intentional action on the things that are not working and revamping them so that they are just like being embraced by the whole company. That's how things just like get reinforced and stick with the people, so that it's not just like something that you create and it's just like written on the wall or the website of the company but never being lived. So this is how you are just like supporting that and just like making sure that everything is just like falling into place.
Right, right. I think the one thing I've also observed, Vinay, in this context is like, uh, I think you mentioned it in the beginning of the discussion, is that leaders have to set the example, right? So they have to walk the
Mm,
talk, right?
yeah.
In a lot of cases, when leaders start to walk the talk, right? If they don't, they communicate as per the handbook, right? They don't uh, stray. They don't use the power or their designation to uh, road. I mean, bulldoze over other people's flexibility, right? And when they do that, that percolates slowly within the organization, right? And that kind of also solidifies any practices into a culture of the company, right? So that's another thing that I've observed, both in a in office setting and in the remote first setting. Um, we've covered a lot of ground, right? In this session, right? We spoke about, and again, in fact, we didn't cover a lot of things, right? So, if you do, you want to briefly talk about the at Remote First Institute, the AI assistant that you and your team have built. Brief
Mhm.
of that as to how and how companies that are looking at being remote first or already in remote first, what they could use, how they could use that to leverage the assistant and
Okay.
then body of knowledge behind it.
Yeah, so Remote First Institute was founded to help companies to transition to and create awareness about remote work so that it is embraced by more people.
Right.
And the AI assistant is a new project, and you can become part of the program. So if you visit remotefirstinstitute.com, you can just like visit the page, start the conversation for free, AI mentor conversation for free, and identify the points where you are lacking. And also, if you sign up and become part of the program, you can create your own AI assistants. So you
Okay.
can just like create your productivity or like whatever you're just like working on, whether you be like a consultant or a company, you can just like design your own AI assistants to increase the productivity and decrease the time you're spending on the tasks. So I highly
Okay.
recommend that you visit the page and even
Certainly.
sign up.
No, I think I didn't realize that, so I'm going to do that first after this call. Again, like I said, Mine, this has been enriching learning experience for me to. I mean, through these questions, uh, I could learn a lot, and through our few interactions, I could learn so much in terms of how to approach this problem, right? And like you said, um, the focus is unduly put on one aspect of remote work, and all these become uh, overshadowed by the workplace conversation. And that I think in this webinar we've covered a lot of that, right? And why that's important, and how should a company approach it in a very scientific and a very intentional way that you spoke about, right? Um, Amazing to have you, and happy to have
Thank you.
been able to host you, and thank you for taking the time out amidst your international travels. You could find this time to do this, and looking forward to a lot more interactions and a lot more engaging conversations with you, Mine, in the future.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for hosting me once again.
Thank you. Have a pleasurable evening ahead.
Bye.
Bye.
Enjoy your day.